Mr. President, I take the Senate back to June 9th of 1772. And I read from Rory Raven's Burning the Gaspee. A handful of longboats glided across the water on a moonless night. The men, some at the oars, others nervously fingering muskets or clubs or handspikes, were silent as they drew closer and closer to the silhouette of a schooner a short distance away. A white British ensign fluttered from the schooner's topmast in a humid breeze. A sentry on deck peered into the darkness, catching sight of the approaching boats. "Who comes there?" he called. The men in the boats bristled at the sentry's English accent. "We mean to come aboard," replied a big man in the lead boat. "You cannot," the sentry shouted back. "You cannot come aboard." A moment later, the schooner's commanding officer came on deck. Roused from his bunk, he stood at the rail in his shirt sleeves. Raising a pistol, he warned the men not to come closer. Another man in another boat rose to his feet and declared, "I am the sheriff of the county of Kent." That would be Kent County, Rhode Island. "I am the sheriff of the county of Kent, God damn you. I have a warrant to apprehend you, God damn you. So surrender, God damn you." The officer drew his sword and repeated his warning. Some of the sailors under his command joined him, weapons at the ready. In one of the boats, a man turned to the friend seated next to him, saying, "Reach me your gun. I can kill that fellow." The gun was handed over. Shouldering the musket, the man took aim, and the shot echoed across the waters. The officer doubled over and fell. The officer involved was Lieutenant Duddingston of the Royal Navy. The ship he was on was the HMS Gaspee, a naval vessel deployed as a revenue cutter to harass the trade of the Rhode Island colonials. There's a bit more of a story around this, because before the challenge to the Gaspee that led to that shooting, the Gaspee had been harassing other Rhode Island ship owners. One of them was a very prominent individual. The Gaspee seized a boat called the Fortune, and this reading from the chapter, "The Dark Affair, the Gaspee Incident" from Empire on the Edge by Nick Bunker. Unwilling to trust a local judge, he sent the Fortune round to Boston, a step of doubtful legality that only made matters worse. Unwittingly, the Gaspee had antagonized a family of Rhode Islanders who embodied all the values for which the colony stood. The rum on board belonged to the Greens, Quakers with a farm or two, a sawmill, and a forge for making anchors. The Navy had not the slightest idea who they were, or why it might not be wise to upset them. But one of the men who owned the cargo was Nathaniel Greene, who would soon shed his Quaker beliefs to become the youngest general in George Washington's army and his closest aide from Bunker Hill to Yorktown. As Greene wrote soon after the arrest of the Fortune, "The loss of her cargo created such a spirit of resentment that I have devoted almost the whole of my time in devising measures for punishing the offender." Well, of course, Nathaniel Greene was not only George Washington's aide-de-camp and administrative officer, but he was also deployed to lead the Southern campaign in the South, which caused Lord Cornwallis to write home to his wife to say, "That damn Greene is more dangerous than Washington." So the Gaspee launched that spirit of resentment that led to a General Greene more dangerous than Washington, a Rhode Islander. The story of that day is fairly simple. July 9th, 1772. Another ship, the Hannah, is making her way north towards Providence when the Gaspee comes after her, seeking to stop and board her and seek to seize her cargo. Well, the Hannah was having none of it. and continued sailing north. So the Gaspee gave chase, and in the course of the chase, the captain of the Hannah steered the vessel over a sandy spit that sticks out where a river comes into Narragansett Bay at a place called Namquit Point, and delivers a column of sand. Now, the captain of the Hannah knew those waters well, and he knew the depths well, and he slid over the shallows in his lighter boat. The big armed Gaspee coming along behind foundered on the sand in a falling tide and was stuck. The despised Gaspee and the despised Lieutenant Duddingston became a target. The Hannah continued up to Providence that night. It was owned by the Brown family, who ended up giving their names to Brown University and were prominent merchants in 1772. And they rallied several longboats full of men who that night, presumably after some refreshment, rowed down from Providence, miles down to where the Gaspee was stranded. And that is where that incident began. It was those men in those longboats on that moonlit night who decided they were going to rid their beloved Narragansett Bay of the wretched and detested Gaspee. So they ended up shooting the captain of the vessel, Lieutenant Duddingston. He survived his wounds. They took the vessel. They captured the crew. They took everybody ashore. They saw that medical care was given to Lieutenant Duddingston. They came back out, and they set fire to the Gaspee. And this painting, which hangs in my office, is a depiction of the Gaspee on fire that night. And as the fire burned, it came to the powder magazine, and the powder magazine exploded, and the Gaspee was blown to smithereens across Narragansett Bay, and that was the end of her. Now, the episode got rather lost to history. And I'll put it in a time context. This is June 9th of 1772. This is more than a year before the Boston Tea Party up in Boston Harbor. On that occasion, Massachusetts colonials painted their faces and boarded a civilian vessel and pushed tea bags off it into Boston Harbor. That was Massachusetts. Rhode Island's effort, a year and a half before, was to trick the military vessel into grounding herself, come down the bay in longboats at night, shoot the captain, capture the crew, and blow the boat up. What more did we need to do to be in the history books? Well, we're getting there. I give this speech every year. Roy Raven wrote Burning the Gaspee. The burning of His Majesty's schooner Gaspee by Stephen Park makes an entire book. And I just read from The Empire on the Edge an entire chapter, from an entire chapter on the Gaspee incident. What happened afterwards is nearly as interesting as the destruction of the Gaspee. King George was furious. Parliament was furious. An enormous bounty on the heads of the men in those longboats was offered by the king. Over $100,000 in today's money. And officials were sent from England to go and put on a trial, find these men, try them, and hang them. No one would talk. About 60,000 people lived in Rhode Island back then. But it was a close community, gathered mostly around the shore, very prosperous community because of its trading, and nobody would talk. There was never any satisfaction to King George for his rages. So I will ask unanimous consent to put into the record the Washington Post article in which this photograph is. You can recognize the picture that I just showed you. It's in the article. And does quite a good job of putting into context this rebellious act by Rhode Island that took place over a year before the Boston Tea Party and yet is mostly overlooked by historians. Here's another version of the Gaspee aflame before it explodes, and here are the men in the longboats coming away from it, having lit that fire. So it's important enough that I thought I might try a poetical hand to it. I've read this before, and I'll read it again. Listen, my colleagues, and you shall see how Rhode Islanders blew up the dread Gaspee. Great Britain was fearsome. She ruled the sea, but Rhode Islanders burned with the fire to be free. So when George sent his frigate to tax our coast, and its arrogant captain was heard to boast that he'd soon have Rhode Island under his sway, well, a course was set for a fateful day. Narragansett Bay sparkled bright and blue, June 9th of 1772. The trading ship Hannah was making her way with cargo for Providence that fine day. King George's Gaspee pursued in chase, but the Hannah decided to give her a race. Away fled the Hannah with wind in her sails as the Gaspee's cannon fired from its rails. Evading the Gaspee's cannonballs, the Hannah sailed for the Namquid Shoals. Fast and light, Hannah crossed the shallow. But when the Gaspee attempted to follow, she ran aground on the Warwick shore in a falling tide and could move no more. That night, dark longboats with muffled oars came slipping quietly down the shore to rid our bay of the dread Gaspee, to show old King George that Rhode Island be free. The battle was fierce off Warwick Neck. When the gun smoke cleared from the Gaspee's deck, the Rhode Islanders had her as their prize, and her crew bound up in chains and ties. When the crew was ashore, Patuxent's Rangers assured they'd present no further danger. Back to the bay in the dark of the night went the Gaspee raiders to set her alight. The fire spread through the raiders' prize till a blast filled the Narragansett Bay skies. The fire had reached the Gaspee's magazines, and her gunpowder blew her to smithereens. Away sped the riders into the dark, leaving in the embers freedom's spark. I want their names, King George demanded, and ordered the raiders be apprehended. But his call for hangings came to naught. His nooses hung empty. No charge was brought, because never a traitorous tale was told. Rhode Island stood steady, silent, and bold. The spark that was struck in the Gaspee raid lit a flame that still burns in our hearts today. And the lesson from then is a lesson now that every American still will avow. However majestic your powers may be, you should heed our warning, don't tread on me. So that is the tale of the Gaspee, and one day it will get its appropriate notice in history. I yield the floor.
Under the previous order, the Senate stands adjourned until 10 a.m. tomorrow.